Thank you for joining us on this wonderful September Tuesday for our lunchtime land development series. Today, our topic is understanding the land development process in Prince George's and Montgomery counties. As I said before, please keep your camera on and ensure that your name is your first and last name so we can identify you on the roster so that you may receive credits for professional engineer, landscape architect, land and landscape surveyor. So I'm told this is a man that needs no introduction, and I actually have to say that I agree. David Thaler of DS Thaler and Associates has been coordinating the land development series in person and now on Zoom for many, many years now for MBIA and the former HBAM organizations. And we are very grateful for you, David. So again, without further ado, I'm going to toss it over to you, cowboy.
Well, thank you all. And our subject today is working out west. So howdy, partners. It's really nice to have everybody back after a long summer. This is the 6th year that we've really done this land development program sort of in this format. And this is the 6th session for 2021. And we want to talk about working out west, understanding the land development process in Prince George's County and in Montgomery County. And we have two outstanding speakers today, two really super land use lawyers who work in the West. And our first is Chris Hatcher. He was a Hewlett-Packard Scholar at Morehouse College and a leadership scholar at the University of Maryland Law School. Additionally, he completed an Asper Judicial Fellowship with the Honorable Susan Garvey of the United States District Court of Maryland. He currently serves on the board of directors of the Hyattsville Community Development Corporation and MBIA itself, and he's guest lectured on many land use issues at the University of Maryland School of Architecture. He's highly experienced in municipal law, land use, zoning, subdivision, urban planning, and other real estate development issues for mixed-use residential, industrial, and office developments in Prince George's County. He regularly appears before the Maryland National Capital Park and Planning Commission, the Prince George's County Council, and the Prince George's County Department of Permits, Inspections, and Enforcement on entitlement and development approvals. And he works very closely with development team members, including architects, engineers, and land planners. And our other speaker today is another outstanding land use lawyer in Prince George's County, and he's Peter Goldsmith. He's a graduate of the University of Maryland School of Law, where he was an editor on the Maryland Law Review, and here he is with a really cool companion out there in Las Vegas. Peter, you still seem to look like a lawyer, though, even in Las Vegas. Before law school, Peter was had a very unusual for us background. He was a project manager and sales associate for NVR's Ryland Homes brand, where he built houses in Prince George's County and sold houses in Prince George's and Baltimore counties. After law school, he worked for the Honorable Peter Krauser, who was then the Chief Judge of the Court of Special Appeals of Maryland. He was an associate with the law firm of Lanoes and Blocker, which represented builders and developers in and around the Capitol Beltway. He is now senior counsel with the Maryland National Capital Park and Planning Commission's Office of General Counsel, where he is assigned to the Prince George's County Land Use Team and advises the Prince George's County Planning Department and Prince George's County Planning Board. We are deeply honored to have such outstanding lawyers. Peter, really, especially you, who have a background in building and law, which is so unusual. So with no further ado, tell us how to develop in Prince George's and Montgomery counties.
Thank you, David. And I think that's proof that you never know what you're going to get when you run into David Thaler in Las Vegas. I'm going to share my screen real quick. Make sure. All right. I'm going to assume that everybody can see my screen. And so as David mentioned, I have worked for a builder, and so I have been the client. I have worked in private practice representing builders and developers, and so I have been the consultant. And 2 years ago, I joined the Maryland National Capital Park and Planning Commission. So I am now working for the regulator. And I have enjoyed all three roles, and I'm enjoying working for one of the most, if not the most, sophisticated planning agency in the state of Maryland. And because I've only been there for 2 years, and because there's still a lot to learn, for some reason I can't answer one of your questions at the end, I'll be happy to do more research for you and follow up either with you or with the group. I really enjoy learning more about my agency. And I believe in order to work out, quote unquote, in the West, and I think David Thaler would agree that people in Baltimore, I think that Baltimore is the center of the known universe, and people in Montgomery County suffer from the same delusion, and you're both wrong. But in order to work out West, you must understand the Maryland National Capital Park and Planning Commission and how it operates. And so what I will do is just talk about the commission and its constituent parts, discuss what are the regional and metropolitan districts and what they mean, talk about the two planning boards, discuss the two district councils and how they operate, and mention a few other things about other administrative bodies that participate in the land development process, and then talk about some other considerations. So you will see that you will hear that the Maryland National Capital Park and Planning Commission is referred to as a bi-county agency. But the commission was actually established by the Maryland General Assembly, and the land use article of the Maryland Code refers to it as an agency of the state. But in some ways, navigating the commission's process is similar to that found in a county's or city's planning and zoning office. And broadly speaking, the commission was created to establish a uniform park system and a long-range planning scheme for the two counties that border the District of Columbia. And it serves as the state of Maryland's complement to the National Capital Planning Commission, which is the federal government's central planning agency for the National Capital Region. And the commission has evolved since 1927. And since 1970, it has also operated Prince George's County's recreation program, which is funded by their recreation tax. And the major source of funding for the commission services are the property taxes in Prince George's and Montgomery County. In Prince George's County alone, the commission operates and maintains over 28,000 acres of parkland throughout the county, including parks, picnic areas, athletic fields, historic sites, community centers, and recreation facilities. And even a large part of that is undeveloped to serve as buffers and open space. And here are a few of the commission's constituent parts. They're not all of them. And where a typical planning and zoning department is part of the county or city government, that is not the case in Montgomery or Prince George's County. Same with the planning board and the parks department. Now, I think in some ways, the degree of separation from the county is good because it arguably offers a degree of insulation from politics. But I think some might say that it adds other layers of regulation, and I think Chris may touch on that as well. But maybe that's good too. The Montgomery County Planning Board and Planning Department work out of their new headquarters in Wheaton. They just moved out of Silver Spring this year, and now they're in the new headquarters in Wheaton, which is a brand new LEED Platinum building. The Prince George's County Planning Board still operates out of the County Administration Building and in Upper Marlboro, but there are plans for a new building in Largo. The Prince George's County Department of Parks and Recreation are located in MNCPPC headquarters in Riverdale. And this is an entrance sign to an MNCPPC park, a block from where I grew up. And so if you're looking for a first-class sledding hill, this is Aberdeen Park is the place for you. At least it was when I was 10 years old. And there was a neighbor who used to turn on his faucet from the hose bib and run water down the hill like an ice luge. And it was fun when I was 10, but now that I'm 30, it seems kind of dangerous. I told this story to the general counsel when he hired me, and he loved it. He said, "It sounds like you're coming home." So the General Assembly granted the commission various powers, such as we have the power to purchase property, and we also have the power to condemn property for parks and recreation. The planning boards are granted land use authority, including planning and zoning and subdivision, and the assignment of street names and house numbers. And right now, both counties are working to rename some streets that are still tied to the Confederacy. And it involves a process that's a lot more difficult than you would think, because it forces people to change their driver's licenses and requires them to notify everyone that needs to know their new address. And I'm glad I'm not a part of that project. But when I joined the commission, like any good land use attorney, I just picked up the land use article of the Maryland Code and started reading Division 2, which is where all the information is about land use in Prince George's and Montgomery County. And I came across an enforcement provision that says if an owner of private property blocks one of our employees, one of the commission employees, from doing their job on that property, such as cleaning a monument, a historic monument, or installing a monument, that person is guilty of a misdemeanor and can be prosecuted in state district court. And I've never seen how the process works, or if we've ever brought charges against anybody, but I really think it would be fun to be a prosecutor for a day. And it reminded me of the time when I went to Yosemite National Park with my wife, and as we were leaving, I saw that there's actually a federal court in the park for to prosecute violations of federal law on the parkland. And I thought that was the second coolest job I think that anybody could have. And I've already had the first coolest job, but I will talk about that in a minute. The jurisdiction of the commission can be described in terms of the regional district and the metropolitan district. They do not cover the same area, and they do not cover all of Prince George's County and Montgomery County. And the regional district is our planning jurisdiction. The metropolitan district is our parks jurisdiction. And the metropolitan district, for example, doesn't include the city of Greenbelt, the city of Gaithersburg, or the city of Rockville. So our parks department can't require developers to dedicate parkland in those jurisdictions. And the regional district includes all of Prince George's County except for the city of Laurel, and all of Montgomery County except for, again, the city of Rockville, Gaithersburg, and other municipalities. And here is a map that shows an overlay of the metropolitan district and the regional district. You'll see up top in the north, it's all white, where municipal boundaries of the city of Laurel is located, where it doesn't fall into either the regional district or the metropolitan district. And now the planning boards share planning and zoning authority with the county council in both jurisdictions, which in their land use capacity is known as the district council. And I will discuss this a little bit further, and so will Chris. The planning boards are also granted authority to hear what is known as mandatory referral. And this process, I think, it's confusing, and it causes confusion even to people who regularly practice in Prince George's County and Montgomery County. And typically public projects like the construction of federal, state, or local government buildings, or structures for public utilities aren't subject to zoning unless the county government consents. But in the regional district, the General Assembly established the mandatory referral process specifically for public projects. So at the very least, state and local government projects must go through this. And the purpose is that there are a lot of government agencies around the Beltway. And when you think about government buildings, you don't really think about planning aesthetics or beautiful architecture. And the mandatory referral process allows the government agencies to get feedback from our very sophisticated planners about their projects. And the law is clear that these are just recommendations, and the agency can completely, wholly ignore what we recommend, but they're still required to go through the process anyway. Most agencies do not ignore what we have to say. And some of the major projects even have to go before the planning board before a hearing. And they can hear opposition too. And for example, this is a real life example and a recent one. If in like a county elementary school building is being constructed with a view shed, within the view shed of Mount Vernon, our staff might recommend different materials to be used so that the building doesn't have a glare and you can't see the building from George Washington's porch. Most community solar projects go through the mandatory referral process rather than zoning. And that's pretty favorable in Prince George's. And so, and some other cases that the planning board hears, but that their only recommendations are special exceptions and rezonings. These aren't hearings. The staff will make a presentation to the board, and they will either adopt the presentation or adopt the recommendation or make amendments to it, and then just transfer their recommendations to either the district council or to the zoning hearing examiner. But the commission serves as the local agency administering the state's Forest Conservation Act and the state's Critical Area Act. So I said the commission shares land use authority with the district council, and the district council is composed of the members of the county council. And so every member on the county council is on the district council and no one else. And so if you have so here you have a legislature sitting in the capacity as an executive agency. And in both counties, they'll hear major special exception cases and rezonings. But only in Prince George's County, and I think this is what makes practicing in Prince George's County different from Montgomery County, and why I think somebody could be an expert in one county, but not necessarily the other. Only in Prince George's County, the Prince George's County District Council can hear appeals of the planning board's decisions on site plans. And there are two types. We've got one, which is a typical appeal where an opponent who appeared before the planning board at the hearing can appeal the site plan approval. And then the other one is known as call-up, where no party appeals and the district council, almost like the highest court in Maryland, just makes a determination on its own that it's going to hear the case. And there's a long history with this process. And I was recently reading some written testimony on a bill from 2011 from Mike Miller, the former president of the Senate, on why back then they were thinking about eliminating this process. And those are for certain reasons that I don't think need to be discussed here. But back then, the call-up had no time restrictions. And so it could have been used as a tool for the district council to call up projects and then just delay them. But now there are time restrictions, and the district council must call the case up within 30 days after the planning board made its final decision. And these appeals are not de novo, so there's no hearing on the record, there's no testimony or anything. They just hear the appeal based on the record that was created before the planning board. and the district council is simply making the determination of whether the planning board was arbitrary and capricious or whether they did something illegal. And then these appeals from the district council, then someone could appeal from the district council through a petition for judicial review to the circuit court. And then it's the district council's attorney that are defending those site plan cases. The planning board has sole jurisdiction of subdivision approval. So when the planning board approves a preliminary plan of subdivision, an opponent would file a petition for judicial review directly in circuit court, and then I would be the attorney defending the planning board's decision, or another attorney from the commission. Now, there are other administrative bodies, as I said, that are part of the development process, and that includes the zoning hearing examiner. And Chris is going to touch on this in more detail. And the zoning hearing examiner will hear special exception cases and rezoning cases, and those can be appealed to the district council. The Board of Appeals is a county agency that hears some variances and enforcement cases. And then there's, like in Baltimore and Prince George's and Montgomery, there's a People's Zoning Council, and it's always been a job that's fascinated me, because this is an attorney who's just appointed to, quote, protect the public interest and promote a full and fair presentation of relevant issues in administrative proceedings in order to achieve balanced records upon which sound land use decisions can be made. And you would think that if you had attorneys on both sides, that would be accomplished. But so without being retained, a People's Zoning Council assists citizens and citizens associations. And so I guess it makes sense, because a lot of attorneys are expensive, citizens and citizen associations aren't very sophisticated, and HOAs just don't have a lot of money. So it serves a purpose. And People's Zoning Council in Prince George's County, where I work, does a very good job as People's Zoning Council. And People's Zoning Council is a very powerful position, because the planning board, and in particular the Prince George's County District Council, may rely on People's Zoning Council for its legal advice. And one of the judges on the highest court in Maryland actually was a deputy People's Zoning Council in Prince George's County. And so the job can lead to other opportunities. And some other considerations kind of lurking in the background, if you're looking to develop in these counties. In Montgomery County, they enacted a new zoning ordinance several years ago, but in Prince George's County, they are currently in the process. And the Prince George's County Planning Board and the District Council held a joint public hearing last night on their new countywide zoning map amendment, which is being adopted in conjunction with the new zoning ordinance and subdivision regulations. And they're looking to rezone every property in Prince George's County. There's a second night of hearings. It went very late into the night last night, and there's a second night of hearings this evening. There are, I believe there's at least one planning board vacancy in Montgomery County. I don't think that's been filled yet. And the chair of the Prince George's County Planning Board just announced that she's retiring. And so that may lead to some changes. And another thing, when you practice in Prince George's County, just so you don't seem like too much of an outsider, sometimes I don't know how I feel like about this, because my name is Peter Goldsmith, and these are my initials, and I think they're the best initials, but you should always avoid referring to the county as PG County. They want to be referred to as Prince George's County, and here's a couple articles kind of giving you the background there. And so I said previously that I thought the second best job would be being a prosecutor in Yosemite National Park. But the first, the coolest job that I think was one that I had as my first job working for the Maryland National Capital Park and Planning Commission in Prince George's County. And when I was an assistant manager and a Zamboni operator for the Cabot John Ice Rink in Montgomery County. And so if you have questions about my job as a Zamboni driver or anything that I've just said, please feel free to reach out to me. Here's my email address. And thank you all very much. And thank you, David, for inviting me to speak. I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
Okay, am I unmuted? Okay, great job, Peter. And let's go to Chris. Chris, I've got a new job in Prince George's County. What do I have to do to get it approved?
Hey, hey, David, can everybody hear me and see me?
I can hear you.
So Peter, I think I need you
Peter,
to,
you need to stop sharing your screen. Okay, Chris, you're up.
just so everybody's aware, I do not have as many cool jobs as Peter growing up, but I think I have a pretty cool one now. Can everyone see my screen? David, can you see my screen? Okay. And so if Peter's job was to sort of describe the commission and the process, the commission, its objectives and its authority, I view my job as being a lot more practical for everybody who's in this webinar. It's how do you process an application through either Prince George's or Montgomery County? What are the differences and what are the things you got to look for? And Peter articulated it, and I think it's definitely worth reiterating. The biggest and most consequential difference between both counties is the role that the council makes in the decision-making process. So, as Peter said, the district council is the county councils of the respective jurisdictions sitting in an executive capacity. So, in Prince George's County, there are 11 district council members. 9 of them are district specific and 2 of them are at large. In Montgomery County, there are 9 county council members. 5 of them are district specific and 4 of them are at large. And it's important when I go through some of the later slides, and you'll see just the type of impact that these elected officials can have in an otherwise administrative process. And I don't say that as a positive thing or a negative thing. It just is. So you just need to understand it before you engage in the process and what the implications of that mean while you're trying to pursue approvals. Personally, I think I think there are some strong reasons why it's a good thing, but I've definitely, experienced on a practical level why it does create some complications. Peter has done a really, really good job of describing what one of the 2 by-county agencies, which is Maryland National Capital Park and Planning Commission. There is another one, it's called WSSC. It manages drinking water and wastewater in both Montgomery counties, Prince George's County. It has its own set of commissioners. It has its own set of lawyers. It has its own set of regulations that you should be pretty familiar with if you're going to do a deal in these jurisdictions. And it certainly has its own permitting process. But just like there are a bunch of by-county agencies, there's also a lot of county-specific agencies. So I like this slide a lot because it shows there are differences between the names of the agencies in the counties, but they're really quite similar. So in Prince George's County, if you're trying to pull a permit for a specific project, the permitting agency is the Department of Permit Inspections and Enforcements. It used to be something different a few years ago, but it went through a name change and an upgrade, which I think was very sorely needed. And in Montgomery County, it's called the Department of Permit Services. So obviously different agencies for different jurisdictions, but they serve similar roles. Same thing with the agencies which regulate county streets. So in Prince George's County, that's the Department of Public Works and Transportation. And Montgomery County, it's Montgomery County Department of Transportation, and something very similar with the Department of Environment in Prince George's County, where it is also the Department of Environmental Protection of Montgomery in Montgomery County. And for anybody who's ever done deals just generally throughout the state, all of these emblems and all of these logos should be very familiar. SHA being the state agency when you're developing along a state road, you need an access permit along state road. Maryland Aviation Authority, for example, there are a lot of local airports scattered throughout Prince George's and Montgomery County. And so you just should really be aware of some of the regulations, local and state regulations associated with developing certain uses and certain intensity of uses around those. Maryland Historic Trust, Army Corps of Engineers, and Department of Environment. Again, for those that have done projects in other areas, not just in Montgomery and Prince George's County, these are going to be very familiar, but it's also important to know that, you know, the things that you experience with these agencies, different staff members, the same thought process. There are essential team members. And so in a moment of shameless advertisement, my name is Chris Hatcher. I'm a land use attorney, primarily in Prince George's, Montgomery County. I think I'm pretty good at my job. I think Peter might, you know, infer that I'm pretty good at my job. But the land use bar in both jurisdictions are really good. And so if I'm not your guy, I definitely think that you should find who your guy is, because unlike in some jurisdictions, the land use attorney is just as important as the civil engineer. So it's been my experience in some jurisdictions, land use attorney is way more important, and in some jurisdictions, the civil engineer is way more important. I would weigh them relatively equally, just given in Prince George's and Montgomery counties, just given the level of sophistication some of the matters can take on and some of the issues that will come up. So it's really important to have that core group really locked in. And then for certain applications, and you'll see over the next few slides, I've highlighted a few of them. There are some team members that are really going to be more essential depending on the type of application. So for example, for a local or zoning map amendment to change zone A to zone B, a land planner is going to definitely be essential, because one of the primary criteria of approval is for compliance with the master plan, more times than not, or change or mistake. However, for a preliminary plan of subdivision, which really tests adequacy of public facilities, depending on where you are and what you're doing, the transportation engineer is going to be more critical, and acoustical engineer is going to be more critical, and perhaps the land planner. But for site plans, whether it's conceptual or detailed, a landscape architect and an architect are going to be more critical. So what is it going to look like? What is it going to feel like? If you're a pedestrian walking along the public thoroughfare, what is the experience? What is the visual experience? And so going to some of the various types. So Peter definitely highlighted a few of them. And so I don't necessarily feel the need to go into the level of detail. But again, this, along with the previous slide, sort of tells you the array of applications. This isn't intended to be exhaustive, just representative. But these are the types of zoning applications that are pretty common in both jurisdictions: zoning map amendments, local map amendments. And I put that in that specific way because in Prince George's, they're called zoning map amendments, but in Montgomery, they're called local map amendments. Again, just another example of a change without a difference, because they really seek to do the same thing: special exceptions or conditional uses, variances, additional types of applications, preliminary plan of subdivision, plat, or vacation plat, and more specifically, vacation plat, just for anybody who's just not aware, is when there's a dedicated road that's shown on a previous plat or deed. It's the process through which you can remove that road. And just sort of urban design or site plan related cases, conceptual site plans and detailed site plans. And I think this portion, this slide, is going to be actually the most beneficial for everybody on this presentation. And it's, okay, I found a piece of land. I found, whether it's semi-entitled or needs some additional entitlements, what is the process generally to go from point A to point B? So for purposes of this example, let's just stick with a site plan. But this portion is similar for all of them. There's the duration of time, and before I go into this, the duration of time for each sequence just depends on the jurisdiction you're in. So what's uniform is there's a pre-acceptance portion of the application, and that's generally when the team submits documents to the regulating agency for, in this case, let's call it park and planning, and there's back and forth between the applicant and the agency about whether the application meets just the minimum requirements for it to be accepted. And accepted is important because that's a term of art which signals the initiation of the formal process. Once there's an agreement between the applicant and the government, that triggers acceptance of the application, which generally is when that application is sent to various agencies, departments inside county and state government to solicit their review. After a set amount of time, it's usually either 14 to 21 days, there's what's called a development review committee. And that's when all the various agencies generally sit around a virtual table nowadays, and any major issues that the application is going to have. It doesn't identify all the issues, but certainly any major issues that could really frustrate the overall project. It's also when established timelines for when new information needs to be submitted, when the staff report is supposed to come out, and when a hearing is supposed to occur. And I use the term hearing there intentional because the type of hearing is dependent on the type of application that you're really going to pursue. So Peter went into it generally, and I think this slide and the next slide are really informative to highlight a few things. A, just the general process for these representative applications, and B, the impact that the district council really can have on some of the processes in Prince George's County. So the hearing for purposes of zoning map amendment is generally before the planning board, but that hearing is really more of a recommendation, which ultimately goes to the zoning hearing examiner. So to elaborate on what the zoning hearing examiner in a relatively simple way, I refer to it as, it's similar to a judge in a judicial case, except they focus only on planning and land use issues. And ultimately they will come up with an opinion for zoning map amendment cases, which is still just a recommendation, because consistent with the Regional District Act land use article, the district council of both respective counties are the only bodies that have the ability to rezone property. And then any appeal of that would go to the circuit court. For special exceptions, again, the planning board is really just an opinion. But what's unique is that when it does go to the zoning hearing examiner, their opinion is actually final unless the district council, either as somebody appeals it or somebody very similar to what Peter was described, district council calls it up. And so if it is then appealed, it goes to the district council, which is sort of interesting because it does inject other elements into an otherwise administrative process, which again, may be good, positive, or maybe negative, depending on the type of application you have. And an appeal of that ultimately goes to the circuit court. The site plan, that hearing is the planning board hearing, which actually is determinative unless it is appealed by one of the people who provided testimony or called up by the district council, which is supposed to sit in the administrative capacity. And that ultimately goes to the circuit court. And as Peter referenced, the preliminary plan of subdivision, the planning board has the final say. And if there is an appeal, then that goes to the courts. So Montgomery County, it's very similar in some respects. For example, when you can see the local map amendment, it's the exact same process, because again, the district council is the only body in Montgomery counties and Prince George's counties that have the authority to rezone properties. But it starts to get pretty interesting when you're looking at the role of the district council on appeals for special exceptions and site plans, because As you can see, after the zoning hearing examiner makes their decision and special exception, if that is appealed, that ultimately goes to the Board of Appeals, which in Montgomery County hears variances and other appeals. But it is an administrative body which is insulated. It's supposed to be insulated from the political process. So you're supposed to be more fact-based and information-based. That is also generally the case in for site plans in Montgomery County, which is sort of interesting because site plans of some form or fashion in both counties are generally the most common applications. And so the injection or lack thereof of that injection of the district council in the appeal process really creates some interesting nuances where it really it can change how you process or how you pursue applications and at what point you think you go forward with certain ones. Now, unfortunately, I skipped one slide earlier. So everything we said about all the applications and all the processes is irrelevant for certain groups of municipalities in Montgomery counties and Prince George's County. And it's for municipalities that have their own zoning authority. So the city of Laurel has its own zoning authority, the city of Gaithersburg and the city of Rockville all have their own zoning authority. So everything you heard Peter say and everything you heard me say, less relevant in those jurisdictions. But even still, with the other, so in Montgomery County, there's roughly 19 municipalities, and in Prince George's County, there's roughly 27. So the other municipalities that do not have zoning authority are still very much involved in the process. And in certain applications, their recommendation can have a meaningful impact on the outcome of those applications. More specifically, when you heard me say once an application is accepted, it's referred out to various departments and agencies. If you are within one of these municipalities, let's say it's the city of Tacoma Park or the city of New Carrollton, they are going to receive one of the packets for that referral information, and then that will start their local process in order to come up with a formal recommendation in your application. And so it ultimately, the practice of land use and zoning ultimately leads you into some municipal issues. And so it's really important to just be aware of some of the challenges that can come up as you're processing some of these applications. There's a lot of information. It's pretty dense, but if I'm here for any questions you have, again, in a moment of shameless advertisement, here's my logo, here's my name, and there's my contact information. I'm going to unshare right now. And open it up if there are any questions or comments.
Carrie, can you give it back to me? Can you hear me? Chris, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I have a few questions. Carrie, how for the audience, how do we want to accept questions? In the chat box? Okay, if you have questions and you're listening in, just unmute and raise your hand and I'll try and call on you. But Chris and Peter, because of the recent act of the legislature, the Prince George's County comprehensive rezoning is underway. Can you run us through that process and when you think it will be finalized? Was that a bad question? Chris?
No, that's an excellent question. It's very timely. I think that I think the first portion of the question might be more appropriate for Peter to handle, because I think that the planning department has a set schedule or an ideal schedule. I think after it reaches a certain point in the process, i.e. when the countywide map amendment is transferred from the planning board to the council, it becomes a little bit, it becomes more in the council's court about when they take it up and ultimately approve it. But Peter, do you have some thoughts on that?
Well, could you sort of tell us what the process is of the hearings, and then make a your best guess when it may get through the council and be final?
Well, I think the the big unknown, at least at this point, was when were they going to hold the joint public hearing and with the county council and the district council. And the answer to that finally is yesterday and today. And it gives an opportunity. This was gave the public and attorneys representing their clients to state publicly their concerns about certain properties that are going to be rezoned. And it went really late into the evening last night. And I expect it's going to do the same tonight. Now, the specific process, if somebody just wants to look this up, it's in Part 19 of the zoning ordinance. And I don't have it memorized what's how the specific process, but tonight, getting over the hump of the joint public hearing is a big one. And we've got several county council members whose terms are up this year, and they've been involved in this process for years. And I think they're really trying to push this over the finish line. So that's where we are.
Well, wild guess.
So just
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Chris.
To bolster what Peter's saying, after the joint public hearing this evening, the record will remain open till roughly the end of the month, so the 29th of this month. And then after that, the council planning staff is going to analyze all the materials that were submitted, either in oral or written testimony, provide briefings to both the council and planning board. And ultimately, the goal, it's my understanding that the goal of the planning department is to have the planning board adopt the county-wide map amendment and transfer it over to the council by the end of October, beginning of November. And so then that's when the process gets a little less out of control of the planning department and more in control of the council and their legislative prerogative. So there are scenarios in which the countywide map amendment very well could be adopted by the end of the year. I think that would be, from everything I've heard from folks at planning, that would be the most ideal. But there's also scenarios where it could go on into Q1 of next year.
Well, there were apparently some preliminary recommendations, longstanding, that go with this. Do you generally expect the preliminary zoning recommendations to be adopted?
You mean, I'm not exactly sure what you mean by preliminary recommendation. there's what they call a decision matrix, I think, that it's just it's almost automatic, which if your property is in one zone, will automatically be transferred into another zone. That applies for almost 95% of the properties in Prince George's County, and I do expect that to go through.
Okay, I have one more question. Suppose you have a property that's a properly zoned. What is the submittal path? Is it concept plan, then preliminary plan that goes before the planning board, then a final plan? And how does that interplay with the site plan approval?
Right. So it's gonna depend on the level of entitlements that and the zone that the project is in. So, for example, if it's in the MXT zone, then generally you're going to have a conceptual site plan, a preliminary plan, and a detailed site plan, and they can generally run relatively concurrently. But then, like anything, there are some nuances to the applications. So if it's in certain overlay zones, then you don't necessarily need a conceptual site plan. However, if the application, for example, is in the CSC zone or any other Euclidean zone, you can generally just go straight to the preliminary plan. The concept plan isn't necessary. And depending on the nature of the use, you may or may not have a detailed site plan. So it's hard to give a specific answer to that question because there are so many variables. But I think that's why you coordinate with the regulators like Peter, or you coordinate with folks with some local experience like myself or a civil engineer. Shameless advertising for myself, Chris Hatcher. just to help you navigate that process because
Well, I think it's fair to say that, well, I think it's been said that if you can work in Prince George's County, you can work anywhere. And, it's difficult, it's complicated, and I don't think it's shameless advertising to say that you should hire somebody who's familiar with the process. So I think that's entirely fair. Both you guys are terrific. Carrie, do we have any questions in the chat box? Okay, if anybody has a question and wants to unmute, now would be the time to do it. Ed Cohen, do you have a question?
Yeah, I mean, knowing the process takes anywhere from 18 months to 2 years, and there's several steps to get accepted for, say, TCP, plan, NRI, and so forth. How is that with the rezoning? How is that transitioning with the acceptance? Being that, you're picking up jobs that might already have a TCP one, but it might be expiring soon with regard to the rezoning. And how is that, is there any kind of grandfathering or process or something like that I should be aware of?
Okay, mute us.
Was the question, did the question refer to grandfathering with respect to the new zoning ordinance? As if there's projects that have certain approvals and but not necessarily haven't crossed the finish line, the answer is, this is really general answer because I think we'd have to take a look at the specific case. But yes, there are certain grandfathering provisions in the new zoning ordinance. Typical that people, this is very general, can operate under the old zoning ordinance for the most part for 2 years. If you need a new preliminary plan of subdivision for your property, you may have to work under the new zoning ordinance. The floating zones in Prince George's County, like the PUD, what in other counties might refer to as a PUD, planned unit development, those are being carried over as legacy zones, and so you would just operate under the old zone there. But these are questions that everyone is raising now. And our staff would be happy to take a look at it, and I know Chris would too.
Unmute me. Do we have any more questions? Stephen Ferrandi, do you have a question? Can you unmute and ask it?
Sure, David. What happens in the county as far as impacts to a particular project, if via school capacity or roads? How is that weighed in when the development cycle?
So impacts to public facilities like police, schools, roads, that's all analyzed during the preliminary plan of subdivision process. And so that's actually goes directly to the planning board. So, I think it was wise when the land use article was adopted that those fairly technical things are relatively insulated from some of the outside influences of an appeal other than to like the council or to another administrative body. Right now, for example, if you're in certain portions of Montgomery County and you file for a preliminary plan, you're not going to be able to meet adequacy because of school capacity related issues. That's not the case in Prince George's County because a few years ago, for example, for school capacity, they adopted legislation where it ultimately becomes something akin to a pay and go. So you have a school facility surcharge fee. However, unlike in certain portions, well, I guess it is both in Montgomery County and Prince George's County, transportation is always a relatively large issue. And so the planning department in the processing of the preliminary plan of subdivision won't necessarily say you can't, we're going to disapprove you because this improvement's going to be necessary. But what they'll say is you need to do this improvement. You're approved subject to this condition, which requires this improvement. The improvement could be something that's like an interchange, so your project's dead. So it's really important to just coordinate with your local consultants and to make sure that you have the right team before you submit anything. So in certain instances, when you're processing an application in certain portions of the county, it might be really important for you to spend some upfront money with your transportation engineer to better understand what the transportation infrastructure is in that portion, whether you're in Montgomery or Prince George's County, so that, you know, you at least know what you're getting yourself into.
Okay, thank you very much. We have a hard stop at 1 o'clock. That was terrific.
There was a question that popped up.
Oh, is it, we have time for one more question.
Landscape manual
Was it a landscape manual question?
Yeah, hello, my name's Mark Willard, landscape architect with Daphne King Walker. We did a project recently in Prince George's County, and I learned there was a new landscape manual that was being prepared, but was not yet approved or being utilized. Will that be approved and utilized as part of the new zoning ordinance, or will that be continue to be in a holding pattern?
Gentlemen?
So as part of the countywide map amendment, when that is ultimately implemented, not necessarily when it's approved, but when it's implemented, that will also implement the new zoning ordinance, the new subdivision ordinance, and the new landscape manual. So at the end of 2018, like Peter referenced, all those ordinances and manuals were adopted, but they were never implemented. And it was always the intention to implement them as part of the countywide map amendment process.
Okay, I'm afraid we have to come to a close. Peter and Chris, thank you very much. That was a terrific introduction to development in Montgomery and Prince George's counties. We will send these certificates out in the next day or two for those who want them. I want to remind everybody in 2 weeks, September 28th, at the request of Mike Wiley, we will do, I have the honor of presenting a talk on my take on regulatory takings, the limits of government regulation, and I'll talk about just what the government can do to you and the limits of what it can actually do. In a month, on October 12th, we're going to talk about environmental site design. This is an issue that's been around for a few years. It's a stormwater management technique, much in need of some improvement, and we're going to suggest that. So thank you to our speakers again. You guys are terrific. I thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you for everybody who tuned in, and I hope I'll see you in 2 weeks. Thank you. We can cut out now.